So Matthew, thank you so much for coming today and illuminating us with all the amazing things you've accomplished or about to accomplish. And really appreciate you spending some time answering questions. And I know there's some familiar faces from other state networks here, but
Mhm.
appreciate you kicking off this series. And I'll turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, it's a great honor, and it's great to be back amongst friends, and new friends and old friends, and yeah, and just gonna continue to share uh, the projects that we were talking about a long time ago. So I'm Matthew Slaats. I'm with the Virginia Solidarity Economy Network, and have been working on that since 2020, more formally, and then doing other things because the network, as I'll probably say, is it's a total volunteer, just a group of people, really. I mean, in its entirety, is just a network of people from across the state of Virginia who are connecting and trying to build a different way of being in the state and thinking about how do we build like the term we use a lot is like enabling infrastructure. But beyond that, like I'm actually my day job is working with Richmond City Council. I'm the civic innovation manager for the city, which means doing awesome participatory budgeting processes. We just got one off the ground last year, after 5 years, 6 years of efforts, to get that moving forward, and then trying to start moving forward on some civic assembly or citizen assembly work here, trying to lay some groundwork for that, see where that leads. But yeah, always like I'm being in government, I'm learning a lot about what that's like, and the limits to it and the opportunities. So, but then yeah, I have been working for 20 years in community engagement and like organizing and advocacy work, mostly in the Hudson Valley, like for a long time, doing work across like environmental work, um, community development work, community revitalization work. And I come from it as an artist, right? Like I come from a history of being an artist. Like my grad degree is in art, and I always like thinking about creativity and how do we bring creativity into community, and then use that using arts and culture and things to build relationships. So I've done everything from played soccer on the streets to connect with Latino populations and Latin populations. I don't speak any Spanish, to doing mural projects and rethinking urban creeks and redesign to doing food justice work and telling the stories of people who need access to food. And yeah, a lot of fingers in a lot of different things. So um, yeah, makes you- um, so Virginia Solidarity Economy. Should I go straight into that, David? Is that the plan? So the Virginia Solidarity Economy, as I mentioned, kind of started in 2020. I'm gonna pull up some slides so you guys don't have to look at me the whole time. Let me see. Because it's something actually we're working on some efforts more broadly. So this slide will says state and regional solidarity economy networks, Virginia, Massachusetts, and California. So those are the kind of primary state solidarity economy networks right now. I mean, it's growing. Yeah, hoping to see ones in Puerto Rico and maybe Indiana and other places where things have been talked about. But um, and doing that work with the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network. But in Virginia, a lot of the work, let me see if this works. Yeah, a lot of the work kind of began here. I mean, you should say like first of all, we have to recognize there's long histories of things that weren't called solidarity economy, but what we now consider part of solidarity economies, to mutual aid networks, Black resistance, indigenous resistance work taking place in Virginia. And those are histories that I think we're really trying to be in tune with and trying to understand. Although many of the indigenous efforts have been pretty much erased. Um, and then we get really amazing books like Collective Courage by Jessica Gordon Nemart, which kind of give us a peek into the history of what mutual aid and cooperative economies and those types of things are actually here. But Virginia is a two things. It's a right to work state, which means we our people like union organizing is undermined and undercut by this idea of a right to work. And then we're also a Dillon rule state, which means power is held at the state level. And so when a city wants to make a decision about certain things, it has to like go to the state to get uh, the permission to do those things. So and then you add onto that a history uh, of of colonization. We were one of the first states to be colonized in North America, and the brutality of that. And then, Richmond, where I'm sitting right now, was one of three cities with South Carolina, Charleston, and New Orleans as kind of the core sites of the North American slave trade. So we were wrestling with those histories. And but we also recognize that there are a lot of other histories that need to be told and talked about. So and like, but I think a lot of what emergence meant for us was, I was living in Charlottesville at the time of the Unite the Right rally, so was there firsthand to see and witness what that meant. And then in 2020, the kind of mixture of the George Floyd um, um, protests and COVID-19 impacts led a group of us to kind of start to reach out to others across the state and think about like how are we in relationship to each other? How are we going beyond just tearing down statues and just actually and getting at the roots of like what created those statues? And how do we start to like, as I mentioned earlier, build some enabling infrastructure around a state that's pretty anti-labor, pro-business, has to contend with these histories in thoughtful ways, and it's something that we need to keep doing and working on. So, so like our mission and goal is really just we're just a network, right? We have to remember that we're just a network of people. So really, it's about connecting people together, looking for common shared interests and practices, and how do we manifest those. We've used this idea, this framework of solidarity economy because we felt like it resonated the most with the people that were at the table at the time, um, and because of a state that's about our typical capitalism conversations of scarcity and risk and individualization. The idea of being in solidarity with each other, we felt was a radical way of thinking about how we should organize. Um, but in specifically thinking about these values and how do we hold these values and not only just talk about the values, but actualize and realize the values in our own lives for ourselves and for our communities in thoughtful ways. So, a good thought to those that to recognize, I think any state should be thinking about this is that you're not just a singularity, right? Like the state boundary is a legal designation. We cross boundaries. Like we are definitely in line with efforts in North Carolina and West Virginia, even though we're bound to this idea of the state of Virginia. But even within that, we're a pretty heterogeneous group of people, right? So you've got the Shenandoah Valley, you've got Southwest rural Appalachia, we've got Southern kind of central. Virginia, which is getting more agricultural and has deep ties to this to Southern conversations. We've got Northern Virginia, which is its own culture, and then we've got the Tidewater and Norfolk. So I think like all of those are very separate, and so a big question we always have to ask ourselves is what does it mean to be working across these cultures and geographies? What connects us together, and what doesn't connect us together, which is just as important a question for a lot of what we do. Um, But we've been doing a lot, again with a just a group of people. The other thing I should say that is that unlike Northeast and West and Northwest, like Virginia is a very risk averse, like from a philanthropic side of things, right? Like we don't have foundations that are going to support this work. There's a lot of funders, there's a lot of very wealthy people in the state, but we have to think very thoughtfully about like how we're doing this and how we're organizing and where are we getting resources from. And I don't think we figured that out yet. We need to start thinking about that more. Um, but we've done a lot. So we started off like doing, you'll see on the left side of the slide, right? Like we started doing what were called learn-ins. So again, it was like about connecting parallel conversations and practices that were going on across the state. So mutual aid works, projects. We've been having a really great, amazing resurgence of people's assemblies just in the last year. There's like five of them that have started up in Virginia, and they're organizing. Richmond had a meeting a few not too long ago, had over 500 people at it, and then they're doing organizing at the neighborhood level. There's actually a talk tonight. Municipalism.org is doing a talk, and friends from the Richmond People's Assembly will be there. Um, but we started to kind of like think about who was out there, and we started to do some mapping. But we saw the mapping like, well, actually knowing that maps are very time-bound objects, right? And a lot of the work that we're doing, people don't necessarily want to be seen or because of the impact it might have on them. Um, our mapping process was more about relationship building. It was like, who is there? What are you up to? Like, what are the values you hold? Like, how do we connect? And what are the connections that we can share together? And those are like been being built and developed very, very slowly and very intentionally. So, um, but we've been making some great headwinds. So like I was on a call with Appalachia Voices and the New Economy Network, which has been doing some work in Southwest Virginia for a long time. Southern Appalachian Mountain Stewards, they're an amazing group. We've been talking to people in Northern Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley. There's a group called Cooperation Shenandoah that's started to emerge. Richmond's very active. The 757, so the Norfolk, Tidewater, Hampton Roads area, has been some activity going on there. And so we're trying to build those and bring those groups together in some ways. But then acting on some specific projects, right? Like, so I've been working on participatory budgeting in the state for 10 years. We did the process in Richmond just last year. We're still working on that. Hopefully, as a future, we're still struggling to kind of keep it moving forward. Um, we've got we started up an organization called Common Shares, which is a cooperative development center in Virginia. It's the first one we've had. Like there's cooperative history, but again, there's not cooperative infrastructure to support it. There's not the capital and the resources and the knowledge base. People in Virginia are always going elsewhere to get that knowledge, and we're like, we need to center that knowledge here in the state. So we've been working on that a little bit. And you have all these great groups like Sicko Soul and Madre Tierra, which are like Latina run groups that are doing amazing work in housing and different things. So there's a pretty big swath of what's been going on. And I think a lot of what we think about ourselves as is less um, an organizer of and more a supporter to groups. So I think in the beginning, we really were focusing on like creating a door, opening up a door to have this conversation, and then just inviting people in. And now I think we're thinking much more about like how are we just a touch point, right? So we've been organizing like quarterly network meetings with groups. And based on some of the work we did with We All, we've been hosting dinners around the state, just funding little small little pots of $500, get some people together, eat something together, have some wine, have some beer, whatever, and just hang out and get to know each other. And then we're letting those groups do what they want to do. Um, so like, and that actually produced there's a new Virginia Send Hub in Northern Virginia now. It's organizing, and they're doing what they're doing. But we've been doing those dinners over the last year, and they've been really great to kind of connect people together. And I think we're going to do another cycle of just again coming together, humanizing each other, trying to not all of the work be about, the bigger, larger project, but just like how do we connect in relationship to each other and build that solidarity and those connections. Yeah. Some of this is what I've been talking about, like, this autonomy with connection, building the enabling infrastructures, right? Like we don't have good co-op law. So like when we create a co-op development center, we have to think about like what does it mean to change state law? What does it mean to get maybe eventually an employee ownership center moving forward? Like that, we have to build all that stuff out. So we're working across like legal and policy and connection in various ways. But everything's been very emergent too. Like we've kind of just let things kind of develop and come together as the community has kind of thought about it and responded to needs in different ways. So um, um, it's been a slow but moving forward thing. I mean, I will say when we gathered, as a bunch of us gathered in DC a few years ago, was it like a year and a half ago? I can't remember how long ago that actually was. Um, but I was coming into that meeting thinking that maybe Virginia Sen was kind of ending. It had a cycle, has a life cycle, and I thought it was gonna like just kind of putter away. And we did some amazing things and new things would emerge out of it, but it's still connecting and it kind of has gone into a little bit of a rethink and then an evolution. So and then we've started to raise a little bit of money, which is really exciting, so we can use that and invest in the dinners and other projects moving forward. So that's really exciting to see happen. And I'll say too that I don't know if this is like one of the things that we did. The network decided very early on that it didn't want to be a nonprofit. Um, so we didn't want to be beholden to the laws and the requirements that that place demands on running an organization. And so it's really just a network. Um, People are emailing each other, calling each other, texting each other, staying in touch when we can. People come and go. Which I think has given it a bit of a it's fragile at moments. At least it feels fragile at moments. But I'll say when we do meet together and are in relation to each other, we there's some amazing things that happen. Uh, and it's the solidarity is what binds us together, and the belief in each other. So it's a really kind of beautiful thing that we've got going on. We just try to check in and be in support of each other. But these are like questions and ideas that kind of pop up, like what's the role of a network? Um, when is the right time to do an act structure? We were very small, so like, we were trying to do all this sociocratic ideas, and it just, we're just too small. Like, why we just needed to talk to each other and try to instead of creating governance. Most of our meetings happened early on Zoom. So we were meeting and talking in that way. And these moments when we've been able to be together, we organized Resist and Build, which is a group of national organizers that have been meeting together. It just took place in Atlanta a few months ago. We did one in Richmond, and it was a great galvanizing moment for a lot of us to think about how we're in relationship to each other. So, yeah, I could keep going on and on and
Yeah.
on. David, yeah,
Yeah.
please stop me. So,
No problem. Yeah, if you'd turn off the screen share, that'd be great too. But thank you, Matthew. I have so many questions. We're going to do a slightly different format today for those who come regularly, because this is more about the different state networks and trying to learn from each other on the state work level. And Matthew, thank you so much for going first, but also just all the amazing work you're doing, and especially doing it out of your love for what you're trying to accomplish. So my questions are going to be more focused around the state network concept. And keeping it around that. And then after that, I'll do a few questions. Then we'll open it up to some of the other state networks and participants to go in whatever direction they want. But the way I'm understanding it is it's a fairly loose network of people that are coming together. Are there any criteria just determining who can or can't be in it, or is it anyone's accepted? Is there a sort of a gatekeeper of some sort? Would you just maybe more describe the ins and outs of that process
Mhm.
of who's in and who's out of the network?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, again, our focus was just like kind of like how do we open this up to people? Even the like kind of the initial call was like we knew a bunch of organizers around the state. And so we reached out to them and said, hey, we're organizing this thing, come be a part of it. And then that led to several months of us meeting. And then, like there would be an election and then people's energy would be drawn to something else. And then we hosted an event, training with the Highlander Center, and we that brought people back in and we had re-energized. And so like it's been a fluctuating kind of like uh thing. We've talked a lot about having like actual membership, but the question is like what are we providing? What is like membership require of people and what does it require of us?
Right.
Um and so I think what we've done is just like let's create a space where people can be in relationship to each other. They can talk about their work that they're working on. They can be inspired by each other. We can dig into some of the conversations. But we haven't been too like putting boundaries up. I mean, another thing that we've done is that there's people in the solidarity economy movement who are very ideologically focused on like either post-capitalist or anti-capitalist kind of thinking, and it's a barrier. We want people to step into these movements, and so we're not so focused on are you a purist, like working towards like it's more about like how are you, what are you curious about? How are we supporting you
Mm.
to kind of think about this and how it impacts your daily life and then the life of your community and the broader context of Virginia. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, no, thank you. And that was sort of where my next question was going to go. Have there been any tensions or conflicts over ideology or other issues that have had to be addressed or smoothed over, or is everybody
Mhm.
fairly operating from a true solidarity sort of concept?
Yeah, I would say that the solidarity is what is the connection. There's been people who kind of come with specific like focal points. We've had some modern money theory people come in and try to like very academic people who kind of come in and try to like say, and I'll say I've got a PhD, so I'm probably one of those people, in little ways. But I think most of it, we read an article really early on that was like kind of placing solidarity economy in like this socialism to capitalism kind of like but and we read that and one of the people that was involved was like I can't bring this article to my board because they would throw it out. It's just like people in Southwest Virginia are gonna respond to those ideas in specific ways. So we were like, okay, how do we think about this differently? And again, I think it comes down to the values of democracy, sustainability, equity, pluralism, and solidarity, right? Like those are kind of generally accepted ideas. And so how do we live those and how do we imbue those into the Virginia that we want to see? And so I think that's been the like if we focus on those, it allows people to step in and they can interpret and think about those ideas in their own lives, and that's what we encourage as we move forward. You're on a journey, like we're just trying to help you along that journey.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I saw a couple people reacting to not choosing to be a 501c3, and I can relate to that personally myself. But I guess I'm wondering what about sustainability in terms of, you've been saying you've been donating your time to this and that there's been some ebbs and flows, which I can relate to that also. And so, not specifically about the 501(c)(3), but um, as a group, is everyone thinking about what does this look like in 2 to 5 years and how to keep it going so that whether it's all volunteer or staff or like what are some of the thoughts about keeping the momentum growing?
Yeah, I mean, one of the early things we did, well, one of the things we did like a year and a half in actually was to actually write a mission and vision statement. And like where do we want to go? And we look back at those things now and we're like, oh my God, like each one of these ideas is like its own entity that needs to get
Yeah,
created. And so some people are picking up those ideas and moving forward with them.
yeah,
I mean, some about it is it's about relationships, like common shares. Like one of the key conversations around solidarity care is worker cooperatives, but not just worker cooperatives for worker cooperatives' sake, but like worker cooperatives as like an integrated economic system that is developing, sustainability and thriving communities. So, but again, we're starting from zero. Like we don't have those systems in place. I mean, we've got a little bit of the culture, a little bit of rural. I mean, the rural cooperative movements are around. We've got electrical cooperatives, um, um, but we need to kind of build out those other ideas.
yeah.
And so people have picked up those threads, and then it's kind of been I've been on a search for those things. Like you find people, and it wasn't until again, he's now a great friend, Sam Gray, who's a co-op lawyer who's from Richmond. Like he had been at Southern Sustainability's Law Center, gone to law school, came back to Virginia now, is in Richmond, is like doing his practice in Richmond. Like we've got a co-op lawyer in like in our midst. And so that's helped us start to think about like what those things happen. So it's like a lot about building those relationships and then seeing where those lead over time. So
Awesome. So I'm going to open it up first to some of the other state networks to ask questions. Try and getting people to keep it to one question at a time so that we can get as many people to go. And also, we generally encourage people to ask a question rather than, submit a thesis or a PhD or something like that. So, Faduma, please share your question with Matthew.
Thank you, David. Hi, Matthew. Thank you so much for sharing and happy to hear all the good work happening there. Recently, I watched a documentary called Co-op Wars. And I heard you say that, there's reluctancy to sort of move towards the 501(c)(3) status. And I guess I'm curious about sort of around the capacity aspect of your work. How is funding routed or managed, special decisions about resourcing, and overall, what does sort of the decision making structure look like, or process, or practice, given the independent nature of the network itself and sort of the folks coming to it who are also building a relationship together?
yeah. I mean, the funding that we got was a little bit by happenstance. Like we got some funding from Highlander at a moment around doing education. Like they had been supporting a solidarity economy training program that then like they lost all their staff and like it was just like that was being lost. And so we said, hey, we want to do that work. A few of us have been trained in that stuff, so we got some funding to kind of start to do some of those efforts. We're a part of the New Economy Coalition, so we got some funding from them to do some of the dinner organizing and going on a few trips. But a lot of that decision making process is collective. We kind of sit down and we say, well, we got these resources. How do we want to use them? And then we think through like a small group of us, like there's like a kind of a coordinating committee that says, okay, how do we want to use this? And we start to like allocate funds based on those things. And so, um, when we just did a little bit of an upgrade on our website and things like that. We're trying to build up our own infrastructure, but I think longer term, I mean, again, part of this, like I said, like the funding in Virginia is not necessarily going to support a solidarity economy movement. Um, and we wanted to kind of like be organic and think through how that might become versus trying to like be beholden to the funders and then say, and then we have to be responsive to them. So even the funding that we got from Greater Washington Community Foundation was about an initiative to like bring a few people together to in like the Northern Virginia networks, just to see like how do we work together and how do we be in relationship to each other. Um, so, but yeah, like the way the decision making happens is we sit down collectively and say, okay, what are we going to use this money for? And we just decide from there. Um, and yeah, and so I mean, it's luckily there's not been any major disagreements on that. I mean, there's been nervousness about liability. Like, what if we get sued? Um, and that's a thing that's out there. We haven't crossed that pathway as of yet. But I do think because the moment we're in now, where work like this is becoming more and more accessible and more interest, like we're actually starting to get people are starting to come to us and asking for us. And so the relationships are starting to grow with the funders, which I think but it's not us searching after grants all the time. It's actually having a relationship with people. And I think that's a much better position to be in for both short term and long term. And I think we're starting to think about that. Um, and maybe the network's not the thing that needs to get funded. It's the things that come out of the network that need to get funded. So, there's like a care economy group in Southwest Virginia. There's a cooperative development thing. There's these people's assemblies that are emerging. Like, and it's about putting people in relationship to other groups and things like that, and helping support that. Um, so I think we're always trying to balance that.
Yeah. Awesome. So, Amanda, you moved inside. It was so nice seeing the outdoors and fresh air, but you also remind me that I should plug next month's event where Vermont will be sharing about their state network. But please
Hey,
go ahead.
Drew's here too, so
Yeah.
she'll be part of it. Thanks so much, Matthew, first of all. That was amazing. I was just gonna type to Anna because I feel like you've just had so many amazing quotes. Yeah, just like beautiful, insightful. Like I am so one, just and I think maybe this was what Duma was saying, but just for clarification, like does it go to like the funding you've received, does it just go to an individual then? Or does it go, you know what I mean? Like how does that work? But the question I had was just a little more practically, like you were talking about how like you have a coordinating committee. Like when you started, how many of you were there, right? Like, and what was the process by which you developed your vision statement, or as you said, like your strategy and like mission, vision, strategy,
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff. Like, what did that actually look like? How many people were involved? Like, yeah, how long did
Mhm.
that sort of process take? Do you see the kind of activities that you presented just now as like related to sort of your theory of change that you developed early on, or is it really, as you said, just like sort of been where there seems to be energy and capacity and already interest that, yeah, it's gone.
Yeah. I mean, the original group of people was 25 people. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, again, we just put a call out. And we wanted it not to be, we wanted to be as representative of the state as possible. So it was people in Danville and Southwest Virginia and Shenandoah and Northern Virginia and Richmond, Charlottesville. I mean, it was just like a big scattering of people that we just kind of knew and were inspired by. And we're like, hey, how do we do this together and think about this together? And then I think the early stuff was very emotionally like focused, right? It was really about like this moment of response to what was going on with, again, I mentioned George Floyd and the histories, like those tying those histories in. Um, and then yeah, and then like again, an election happened, and then that drew a lot of people away because it was like all of a sudden you had to get out and do your work for the two parties. And so we lost people, and then we did that training with Highlander, and that brought a lot more people back in. Um, and so again, it's kind of like I feel like it's like breathing, right? Like it's like inhaling and exhaling. And then in the end, like I think like with any like organizing movement kind of thing, it comes down to like a handful of people who are at the table, and they're consistently at the table. Not that we're not open to others being at the table, it's just like they're the people that are showing up, and like using the Adrienne Marie Brown kind of phrase, right? Like the people that are there, the people that are meant to be there. So let's focus on those relationships. Uh, so I think like the when we did the our mission and vision, it was like few month process. A group of us kind of sat down and said we need to like codify a little bit more about what we're trying to achieve and what this network means and how it functions. Um, we went back and forth. Again, we had, you like Lindsay is a mom in rural Virginia that's works for a nonprofit, and she was like dealing with kids and things like that, and then we had a person who was like a modern money, like super academic modern money theory guy who wanted to talk about that stuff all the time. And so it was, how do we hold each other accountable to like moving that idea of creating this vision and mission forward. um and then just kind of dreaming about what that could be. And then we did this thing like where like when we do decision makings at that level, like we create a proposal, we throw it out to the network, we let people give feedback for a month or so. Then we have a conversation about that feedback. How do we integrate those ideas? How are we very clear about, oh, this doesn't fit in, but we want to recognize its importance in the conversation. And having that concept out. And then finally, we just put it out for a final vote, of as many people as want to participate. So, um, and I think in those processes, like we find that we reach consensus pretty easily. But we want to create space for people's differing opinions, and acknowledging those. So I think that's a big piece of kind of developing those ideas, and having that center. In the end, it brings belonging and ownership to the process, which I think is like a crucial thing. Even though it's a small group of people, we're always like, how do we bring others into the conversation? So, and now it's evolving into something different. I think we're in a moment where, like with this Nova group, I'm like, I don't even know what they're actually doing. Like I went up and met with them and talked a little bit about how things started, but I'm letting them kind of take their own pathway. Um, and we're getting some other groups pop up that and I think there could be a future where, again, there's more membership. Like I could see us having like more specific quarterly meetings of those nodes of activity, where we're like, what do you need? How do we support you? Like, is there an idea that's emergent? There's a collaboration opportunities, and then from there, we can go out and sort of raise funds, or look for other resources. So,
Thank you. So, any other people from state networks have a question, or should we open it up to everyone? Okay, so anyone who's got a question. If not, I've got 7 or 8 in my back pocket. So, Anna, please.
Thanks, David, and thank you so much, Matthew. That was fantastic. David, I'm pretty sure that I will ask one of the questions that are on your bucket list. So it was really amazing, and I was very surprised, even when you mentioned about the 25 people that initially you started that network, right? I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but at the same time, trying to build trust within 25 people, that's a lot, because even within smaller teams, it can take so much time. And I guess that's the struggle that very often networks have, that, as you said, the whole relationship building process was done very intentionally, but very slowly. So how can you build trust? Because, as you said, it takes time. But at the same time, when there are opportunities that emerge, as you mentioned, the elections, or when you organize an event, like, where is that balance that you want to allow time to build trust within that group, but at the same time, you just need to act, right? If there is an opportunity, you would really like to use that opportunity so that you can invite more people, or you can just feel that actually the group has a reason to exist, and you would like to take advantage of the fact that you all came together.
Yeah, yeah. I would say, yeah, again, like I mentioned, it was a very like solidarity economy is a very like abstract idea. Um, so again, like I think a lot of people are struggling with like what does it mean? Am I body? Like how does my body be in solidarity with even itself in the nature in the world it's in? To being thinking like to not even getting to think of like, oh, we need to create like we need to fix state law. Like people aren't even there yet. And that's fine. And so I think it's like trying to find those moments, creating opportunities, to be in relationship to each other. Again, over Zoom. Like a lot of us hadn't even been in a room together until Resist and Build. Um, so, always doing check-ins, right? Like how are you coming into spaces? I mean, using a lot of those really traditional like organizing like tools to like make sure we're spending. We may spend a whole meeting just checking in with people, each other, and that's fine. We don't have to accomplish anything. We're not. There's nothing so dire, so important that we can't take the time just to see how are we each doing. But I do think the one of the powers of doing small projects. This came up actually last week in we were speaking at the Next Systems like convergence that took place, and just like small little what are the small things we can do together. So like at the moment, one of the members that was showing up was talking about how ARPA dollars were coming into his community and they were being wasted. I mean, they're just being spent on projects that that actually aren't making the community better. Like they weren't healing the community, and they're just going towards street projects and infrastructure projects. And so we are all started to help think about like, well, how could we think about that a little differently? And we wrote up a little like two-pager, like here's how you can rethink ARPA dollars, the spending of ARPA dollars. And so that got distributed out there to a few hundred people. And then we use that as a resource to share to other places too. So it was like how are we directly responding to a specific need of a person, and then how could that translate to other spaces and other opportunities over time? So I think that was just about in that a lot of that was just about relationship building. And I think the network is really that's what it's about. It's about finding moments to be in support of each other. We sometimes think about it as like a space for just being able to complain about things and talk about challenges and being vulnerable with each other. So I think that's important, right? Even though there's bigger problems to take care of. So
Thank you. Anyone else have a question? All right. Well, look like Erin. All right, great.
Hi, thanks so much. I I'd maybe because I came in 3 minutes late, but I loved your presentation. I would love to hear a little bit more about like the resources that you had when you started, because like hearing like a we and like people we already knew. And yeah, so how would you recommend like if someone was thinking about starting a similar thing in a state that didn't have one, like assessing
hmm.
the relationships, the capacity that you have, and like
Yeah.
building. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I mean, so much for me at the beginning was that I was a PhD student. So I had all of these resources from the university accessible. So like Zoom was free. I could pull and access like articles and information in different ways. Um, and I had time, like I was writing and I had a lot of time on my hands. So I just was using that to organize at that moment. I wasn't making any money, but that was fine for the moment. Um, um, and I think like there's been different practices. So like Massachusetts, the way it organized was it coalesced a group of organizations, right? Like you have like a specific infrastructure that was already in place um, with various institutions, and then they donated time for those groups to then like there was like a individual at like the Center for Economic Democracy was very involved in helping kind of get Mass Send moving forward, and then there's like we at the University of Amherst, like very radical, like economic place where lots of things are happening. So there's like the culture was already there, and so they just pulled together networks of organizations that were already moving forward and that could commit to this. Um, it sounds like that's kind of a similar model that's happening in California. Like last year, David Cobb pulled together a group of organizers that he knew that was like, hey, would you be interested? And he actually did a series of meetings. Both myself and Emily Quano spoke at them, being like, here's what we did, here's what you could do. You can decide what you want to do. And he was actually like, if after 4 meetings, like there wasn't a desire to move something forward, he was going to be like, he was like, this is not worth doing. Um, um, Again, in Virginia, I think it's been a little bit different. Like we don't necessarily have those organizations. Um, we don't have that infrastructure to like actually move that forward. So we had to find groups that were doing work that was very differently positioned. Um, like I had no relationship to Southern Appalachian Mountain Stewards before we started this, and they're an organization that started after as a response to like mountaintop mining in Southwest Virginia, where a boulder rolled down the hill and crushed a home with people in it, right? And so they've been fighting like the degradation of rural Appalachia for 20 years. And so it was like about how do we work in relationship to them and be meaningful. Again, it ebbs and flows. Like organizations come and go, and like I think we give people space to like the New Economy Network. I hadn't talked to them in over a year as of 2 days ago, and I caught up with them, and they're working on a just transition policy for the state. And we're like, how can we help promote that? Like, again, it's how do we be in support and in solidarity with each other, even though like the work doesn't always align. So it's a lot about the relationship building, and that takes time. Um, and so I think finding those key partners, thinking about the allies versus your not so allies versus people that are actually going to be obstructing you, and kind of thinking like as you start to map out like a power network map of what's going on in the state, you have to think about who are your core connections, and then also like let some of those be emergent, right? Like some of those groups may not be supportive at the beginning, but over time, as they see what you're doing becomes more and more meaningful, they might become stronger partners. So it's like an evolution and development of those relationships. So I hope that helps, Aaron. Is that
Yeah. I've got a question, which is, you talked a bit earlier about geography, about how people are spread out from each other, but I'm also just wondering if there's anything to the fact of unique to Virginia, either where you're located or the types of people who live there or the landscape that informs what has happened in the past or might happen in the future as part of what you're doing. Is there something land, about the types of people that are there and the type of land?
it's a good question. I mean, again, I think there's these cultures and these histories that have long been here, right? Like you think about, mountain mining or union organizing back in the early 20th century, right? Like there's those histories that are there, the environmental movements that have kind of emerged from Appalachia. Um, there's some histories of getting cooperative and mutual aid work. Like again, like that's what was great about reading Collective Courage, right? Is that the Knights of Columbus were very active in Richmond. In Fredericksburg, you had mutual aid networks of 10,000 people. All those are gone. Like but there's still something there. There's a connection. Um, And so how do we think about that is a big piece. So I mean, I think, we have the Great Dismal Swamp, right? Like that was a refuge for people, especially indigenous and Black communities, to get away from colonization. And you read like Modibo Kadali's writing about some of that around down the whole East Coast. And so there's those networks that are still a piece of that. And then like again, there's a note in Collective Courage where uh, she writes about like Ruthville, Virginia, like, and how there was this like really beautiful little Black cooperative like emerged, and that was a really about like her arguments, like it's about risk, like minimizing risk and maximizing relationships. And so they created a store where they were accessing grain and agricultural supplies from Richmond because they could buy it a lot cheaper. And you go to Ruthville and you realize that it's actually at this nexus of like four different plantations. So it was the slave communities that were coming off those plantations, and they created a little tiny community, um, that then, like right now, like I was there 2 years ago, and there's an old school that's there that's no longer used. There's a few buildings, there's a post office, but when you're in that area, like you see people driving, it's primarily people of color, the Black community, the real Black farmers that are there, that are still there from those histories, and that they talk about how like these cooperatives weren't going to change the world, but they were going to sustain community in meaningful ways. And I think that's something to think about. And so it's not, let's say, like a super geographically specific thing, but like it's in the soil in interesting ways. And it's kind of always great to find and be surprised by these moments. We keep finding people doing things in little nooks and crannies around the state.
Yeah. Amanda, if you don't mind, I'm going to let Derek ask questions since he hasn't gone yet. And this will be our last question. So want to give Matthew just a little time at the end to add anything he feels he missed. But Derek, go for it.
Thanks, David. Sorry, Amanda, if you want to squeeze something in somehow. Matthew, good to see you. My question is a little bit about kind of how you track making progress, right? You kind of clearly articulate how this is a network and a mutual support network rather than like a coalition driving towards one objective. I'm just wondering how you think about like opportunity costs of doing one thing or another, or knowing like that the intent is moving towards the outcome you want to see.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the big issues, like I remember when we first started, I did a big diagram of like what it would mean to change Virginia, to actually realize this all. And I was like, oh, we need a totally new legal system. We need a totally new educational system. We need a new like capital flows system. Like it just like it's too big of an idea. We need a new political system. So again, that's where I think the emergence. I mean, it is a bit haphazard, but the emergence of certain moments, like there was a conversation in Southwestern Virginia with some of the people that we were working with. They're like, we want to create, like, we are social workers. We hate being a part of the social care system. It both degrades us and it degrades our patients. We are going to go create a cooperative, and we're going to go out and do that. And so they started a care collective in Southwest Virginia, which is still emerging, but it's ideally about like providing deeper care into those communities, and like both birth and death doula supports, like traditional healing mechanism means, and like going up into the mountains and like gathering historical resources for the community, taking care of our children. So that became a conversation, and then we would organize an event around that, which then would kind of coalesce a bigger conversation and resources. And then it's just about being present. We were being trained to be as present to those groups as possible. So I would show up in a meeting on a Friday and say, like, what are you guys working on? How can I help you? And I would put them in relationship to other groups around the country doing that work based on the connections I had. So again, a lot of it's emergent. I think now, because the ideas are getting bigger, like running a participatory budgeting process at the city, like required me to go work for the city, and to work on that for 5 or 6 years. I've been working on that for more than that. I mean, more like 10 years. I'm not sold on it right now, to be honest, of working for the city, what it means to do that. Um, but also I'm in the city and I can have relationships with groups doing the advocacy work on the outside. It's making me realize how important having like forms of dual power, like the inside and outside working in relationship to each other is important. Um, but and then I think the cooperative stuff kind of emerged from again a conversation that had been bubbling, but then not really like moving forward. Like no one was coalescing on it. It wasn't until a group of people started to coalesce around that interest that we started to kind of move on. Like we kind of started to move forward on that and build the relationships to make that a reality. So again, I think it is a little bit organic, but it's really trying to be responsive to where people's energies are and their needs. Um, I don't think it's perfect. We need to strengthen those things. So I think we need to take a pretty big jump in the next 2 years to move us forward in a much more meaningful way. So,
Awesome. Thank you again, Matthew, for going first. We got 6 more of these. Everybody's going to hear from Vermont, Puerto Rico, Washington State, Hawaii. So we got a lot more, but appreciate you sort of setting the standard for how these will go and contributing. And I'm just going to do a quick little plugging for those who are not on our mailing list. We've got a metrics event coming up Thursday, something called Community Assemblies next week, which I'm curious if is the same thing as People Assembly. So I'll connect with you on that one. And then a woman who trains high school students to be leaders and go into politics, which is kind of an unusual, different one. So love exploring all these topics and trying to figure out how we get there sooner. So thank you, Anna and Amanda, for setting up this series. And mostly thank you, Matthew. So let's hear from Matthew. Woo!